No one heard a scream, no one saw a thing. And by morning, 4 college students were dead. Their lives stolen in the darkness of a quiet Idaho town. It was the kind of crime that shouldn't have happened, not in Moscow, Idaho. This was a peaceful, rural college town where people didn't lock their doors, where students walked home from parties at 2 a.m. and where neighbors waved to each other across their driveways. But that illusion of safety shattered forever on the morning of November 13th, 2022. Just off campus at 1122 King Road stood a 3-story rental house shared by 6 University of Idaho students. From the outside, it looked like any typical college house. String lights on the porch, empty cups from weekend parties, and laughter pouring through open windows. But that night, something unthinkable happened inside. By noon the next day, 4 young lives had been violently taken. No one had heard the screams, no alarms had gone off. The town, the university, and soon the entire nation were stunned by the brutality and the mystery of what became known as the University of Idaho murders. The victims were more than names in headlines. They were young people full of promise and plans, whose futures were brutally cut short. Kaylee Goncalves, 21, a senior majoring in general studies. Bold, adventurous, and full of ambition, Kaylee had recently moved out of the King Road house but returned that weekend to visit her best friend Madison and show off her new Range Rover. She was due to graduate early and had accepted a marketing job in Austin, Texas. Madison Maddie, Mogen, 21, Kaylee's lifelong best friend. They were inseparable, almost like sisters. Maddie was majoring in marketing and was known for her quick wit and loving personality. Xana Kernodle, 20, vibrant, athletic, and always smiling. A junior studying marketing, Xana had a fire in her spirit that drew people in. She lived on the 2nd floor and had been dating Ethan Chapin for months. Ethan Chapin, 20, a triplet, athletic and joyful. Ethan didn't live in the house, but was spending the night with Xana. He was a freshman studying recreation, sport, and tourism management. Together, they represented the best parts of youth: hope, friendship, and freedom. That their lives were taken in one of the most vicious acts of violence the small town had ever seen. Saturday, November 12th, was a normal night. Kaylee and Maddie spent the evening out at the Corner Club, a popular bar downtown. Security footage shows them leaving around 1:30 a.m. and walking to a nearby food truck called Grub Truck, a well-known late-night stop. They ordered carbonara and chatted with friends. Everything about their demeanor was relaxed, happy, unaware.
They caught a ride home from a private party driver, arriving back at King Road at 1:56 a.m. Meanwhile, Xana and Ethan had spent the evening at a Sigma Chi fraternity party just a few minutes away. They returned to the house around 1:45 a.m. By 2 a.m., all 4 victims were inside. Also in the house were 2 other roommates, one on the 1st floor, the other on the same floor as Kaylee and Maddie. These 2 would survive the night, and later provide vital witness statements. The house had multiple entrances. Police later believed the suspect entered through the sliding glass door on the 2nd floor, which led directly into the kitchen, possibly left unlocked that night. The killer would have had to move through that entryway and then up or downstairs to reach each bedroom. The attack was brutal and fast. According to coroner reports, each victim had been stabbed multiple times, likely while asleep. Some had defensive wounds, particularly Xana, suggesting she had woken up and fought back. But the others, Kaylee, Maddie, and Ethan, likely never had a chance. There were no signs of forced entry, no stolen items, no blood trail outside. The killer came prepared, moved swiftly, and vanished into the night. Shockingly, it wasn't until nearly noon the next day, at 11:58 a.m., that a 911 call was made. The call came from the phone of one of the surviving roommates. The contents of the call remain redacted, but police noted it was a report of an unconscious person. Officers from Moscow Police Department arrived minutes later, expecting a routine welfare check. Instead, they found a scene so horrific that seasoned investigators were left shaken. One of the first responders would later describe it as the worst crime scene of his entire career. All 4 victims were dead, in their respective bedrooms, 2 on the second floor, 2 on the third. What stunned investigators the most was how quietly the killer had moved. The surviving roommates hadn't heard the murders happening. One had reportedly seen a masked man in black leave through the sliding glass door, but had locked her door and gone back to sleep, believing it to be just someone drunk leaving the house. News of the murder spread rapidly. Within 24 hours, national outlets picked up the story. The FBI and Idaho State Police joined the investigation. Hundreds of tips flooded in, students packed up and left campus early. Parents called their children in panic, and in the absence of answers, fear took hold. The University of Idaho, with just over 11,000 students, cancelled classes and held vigils. Police released very little information in those early days, frustrating families and feeding online speculation. But behind the scenes, law enforcement already had a crucial piece of evidence. A DNA sample recovered from a knife sheath found next to one of the victims on the third floor, a tan K-bar-style military knife sheath left behind. The killer's one critical mistake. It wouldn't be long before that DNA would lead them across the country, to a suspect hiding in plain sight. The murders had gripped the nation, 4 innocent students slain in their beds with no clear motive, no public suspects, and no arrests for over 6 weeks. But behind the veil of silence, investigators were carefully, methodically closing in on a man they believed had planned this attack long before he ever stepped foot inside 1122 King Road. His name was Bryan Christopher Kohberger. At the time of the murders, Bryan wasn't a fugitive. He wasn't hiding in some distant forest or skipping town under an alias. In fact, he was right out in the open, attending graduate school at Washington State University just 10 miles away from the crime scene. He was a PhD student in criminology with a special interest in forensics and criminal behavior. He had even studied under famed forensic psychologist Dr. Catherine Ramsland, who co-authored books with serial killer Dennis Rader, the BTK murderer. This wasn't just chilling, it was calculated. And that made it even more terrifying. The break in the case came from a small, overlooked item left at the crime scene, a tan leather knife sheath, found next to the bodies of Kaylee and Maddie on the third floor. Investigators immediately sent it to the Idaho State Crime Lab. Testing revealed a male DNA profile on the snap button of the sheath, and it didn't match any of the victims or their known contacts. But they didn't stop there. Law enforcement quietly collected trash from the Kohberger family home in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania, where Bryan had returned for the holidays in late December. They sent DNA from his father, collected from the trash, to the lab, and found a familial match to the sheath's DNA. This placed Bryan Kohberger at the crime scene. It was the crack investigators had waited weeks for. But DNA wasn't the only thing tying Bryan to the murders. Investigators obtained a warrant for cell tower data from Kohberger's phone. What they found was damning. Bryan's phone pinged near the King Road house at least 12 times before the night of the murders, dating back to August 2022. On November 13th, between 2:42 a.m. and 4:48 a.m., the exact window of time when the murders occurred, his phone was turned off or in airplane mode, which police interpreted as an intentional attempt to avoid location tracking. At 4:48 a.m., just 20 minutes after the estimated time of the killings, his phone reconnected to the network on a rural highway south of Moscow, appearing to head back toward Pullman, Washington, where he lived. Surveillance footage from both Pullman and Moscow showed a white Hyundai Elantra, matching Bryan's car, repeatedly circling the area near King Road during the early morning hours of the murders. More disturbing, Bryan was seen returning to the crime scene hours later, around 9 a.m., possibly to see if police had arrived yet. He drove by the house slowly, in a wide circle, caught on neighbors' security cameras. Bryan Kohberger wasn't just a student of criminology, he was immersed in it. He had graduated from DeSales University in Pennsylvania with a bachelor's and master's degree in criminal justice before enrolling in the PhD program at Washington State. He was described by classmates as intelligent but socially awkward, intense in his opinions, and overly eager to dominate class discussions. Some said he came across as arrogant. Others said he had a strange fascination with serial killers. A Reddit post linked to one of his old studies surfaced, in which he had asked ex-cons to fill out surveys, describing how they chose their victims, how they prepared for crimes, and how they felt afterward. At the time, it seemed academic. After the murders, it felt like foreshadowing. He had also applied for an internship with the Pullman Police Department, saying he wanted to assist rural law enforcement agencies with how to better collect and analyze technological data. One professor described him as brilliant, but deeply uncomfortable to be around. On December 30th, 2022, at 1:30 a.m., a SWAT team descended on the Kohberger family home in Pennsylvania. He had driven 2,500 miles home with his father after the semester ended. Bryan was arrested without incident and charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of felony burglary. He was extradited back to Idaho days later. When police raided his apartment in Pullman, they found hair strands, stained mattress covers, and a glove, all of which was sent for DNA analysis. They also seized computers and other digital devices for further evidence. During transport, a source revealed that Bryan asked if anyone else had been arrested, a detail prosecutors would later point to as suspicious. Bryan Kohberger's initial court appearance took place on January 5, 2023, in Later County Court. He stood silent as a judge read the charges. The courtroom was filled with press, grieving families, and stunned community members. He was held without bail. As details from the affidavit were unsealed, the public began to understand just how tight the case was. DNA evidence, vehicle tracking, surveillance, cell tower pings, and even a surviving roommate who saw a masked figure with bushy eyebrows exiting the house. Prosecutors said the crime was premeditated, that Bryan had planned and stalked the victims, possibly choosing the house based on routine observations. Still, one question loomed over everything. Why? Bryan Kohberger has never spoken publicly about a motive. No clear connection to the victims has ever been confirmed. And for all the physical evidence prosecutors had, they lacked what every grieving parent wanted most, a reason. "We don't get closure," said Steve Goncalves, Kaylee's father. "We get accountability, maybe, but we'll never understand how someone could do this." In June 2025, after over 2 years of motions, delays, and mounting media attention, Bryan Kohberger stunned the courtroom by entering a guilty plea to all 4 murders in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. The families had mixed reactions. Some wanted justice by execution. Others, like Maddie's family, said they only wanted the case to end, so they could begin the real mourning. Still, Kohberger offered no statement, no apology, no explanation. He remained emotionless as the judge sentenced him to life in prison without parole, 4 consecutive life terms. How did a doctoral student, a man studying the very science of murder, become a killer himself? Was it narcissism, arrogance, a need to prove something no one else could see? Or was it deeper than that, something broken in his mind long before he walked into that house? The trial didn't answer these questions. The guilty plea avoided them. And now, with no chance of appeal, Bryan Kohberger will likely never speak again. But one thing is certain. The lives he stole, Kaylee, Maddie, Xana, and Ethan, will never be forgotten. The trial was over. Bryan Kohberger was sentenced to 4 consecutive life terms. He would never again walk free. But for the families of Kaylee, Maddie, Xana, and Ethan, there would be no peace. Because when someone you love is taken from you in such a violent, senseless way, there's no real justice. There's only survival. There's only waking up every day with an ache that doesn't go away. From the earliest days after the murders, it was the families who kept the case alive, pushing for answers, speaking through their pain, refusing to let the story fade. Steve and Christy Goncalves, Kaylee's parents, became the most public voices. Steve gave raw, emotional interviews, calling out delays, demanding more from law enforcement, and making sure his daughter's name was never forgotten. He described Kaylee as his firecracker, a girl who loved fiercely and lived without fear. "She was my best friend," he said, "and now she's just gone." Maddie Mogen's family stayed more private but supported every step. Her father once said, "The thing that hurts the most is that we'll never get to see what she was going to become. We'll never get to see her wedding, her career, her next birthday. That was stolen from us." Xana's family, especially her father, Jeff Kernodle, expressed heartbreak over how his daughter, just 20 years old, fought back with everything she had. "She was tough," he said. "She didn't go down without a fight." And Ethan Chapin's parents grieved publicly not just for Ethan, but for his 2 surviving triplet siblings who had to bury their brother and return to school without him. His mother, Stacy Chapin, described Ethan as a bright light and said, "We're living every parent's worst nightmare." The University of Idaho tried to find ways to heal. In the weeks following the murders, students held vigils, professors cancelled finals, and counselors worked around the clock. The school eventually demolished 1822 King Road, the house where the murders occurred, a move both symbolic and deeply emotional. They didn't want the home to become a tourist attraction or a dark monument. They wanted it gone. In its place, the university created a healing garden, with benches and 4 trees planted in memory of the victims. It's a place of silence now, where people come not to ask why, but to remember who. In July 2025, a new docuseries titled One Night in Idaho premiered on streaming platforms. It was the first major project to capture not just the crime, but the human cost behind it. The series focused on the families, the confusion in the investigation, the digital evidence, and the chilling detail that Bryan Kohberger had been so close, just across the state line, studying criminal behavior while plotting real-life murder. It asked the question no one could answer. Why them? Why that house? Why those 4? The show sparked renewed attention on the case and brought back national interest, but it didn't provide any new answers. Bryan Kohberger never spoke about his motive. Not to the court, not to the media, not to the families. And that silence, that gaping, senseless void, is what haunts everyone still. Even now, with a confession, a sentence, and the suspect locked away for life, no motive has ever been confirmed. Was it a targeted attack? Prosecutors said yes, but they never explained why. Was Kohberger stalking one of the girls? Did he feel rejected? Was he trying to execute the perfect crime as a twisted academic challenge? Or was it something darker, a fantasy playing out in real life? None of it makes sense, and maybe it never will. A lack of closure is what torments the families most. They didn't just lose their children, they lost their peace, and no amount of justice brings them back. "There's a monster sitting in prison," said Goncalves, "but he still has air in his lungs, he still gets to wake up. My daughter doesn't. None of them do." 4 names that deserve remembering. Let this not just be a story about a killer. Let it be a reminder of the lives that were lived fully, beautifully, and far too briefly. Kaylee Goncalves, bold, bright, and already hired for her first post-college job. Madison Mogen, loyal, hilarious, and loved by everyone who knew her. Xana Kernodle, fierce, athletic, and always laughing. Ethan Chapin, kind, generous, and the heart of his siblings' trio. Their stories didn't end because they were ready. They ended because someone made a choice, a violent, cold, premeditated choice. And now, it's up to all of us to make sure they are remembered for more than just the way they died. If this story moved you, if it made you angry, heartbroken, or even speechless, don't let it end here. Subscribe for more deeply researched, emotionally told true crime stories. Comment your thoughts, and most of all, say their names, always. This isn't just a case, it's a scar that a town and a country will carry forever.